All right, hello and welcome into another edition of 8Sports Nightcap. Finally able to get this episode out to you this week. Tuesday, obviously, VCU had a home game, so we weren't able to have our 8Sports Nightcap that night because I was at the game. And then yesterday, we had some technical difficulties with the mic, and that was what the delay was to finally get this episode out to you. But we're expecting to have a really good episode this week. Welcomed in a guest in the University of Richmond's Bob Black, the voice of the Spiders, joined me. And we'll get to talk to him in just a bit about his career of broadcasting over 40 years here in the Richmond market. And then, of course, we're going to talk a little VCU hoops with their big win over St. Louis on Tuesday night. And then we'll talk about Richmond's matchup against St. Bonaventure last night that the Spiders fell short in on the road up in New York. So we got a pretty exciting packed show. We'll talk a little Commanders as well, as it is playoff week. Today was the last day of practice for Washington as they prepare to head up to Detroit for their divisional round matchup against the Lions. So a lot to talk about this week, a lot on the docket. If you've not tuned in to an 8Sports Nightcap before, it's kind of just a recap show, a little bit of a preview thing, and we just kind of talk some ball and have some fun along the way. And so let's go ahead and jump into our first game to talk about, and that is, of course, the Rams' big win on Tuesday night at home over St. Louis. The Rams win it 78-62, thanks to Joe Bamisile. Had an incredible night. He led the way with 23 points. Jack Clark added 12. 4 and 5. Max Shulga nearly had a double-double, 9 assists. He was dishing the ball all over the place. And really impressive showing from VCU. In fact, we got some highlights from this matchup, and let's go ahead and take a look at those highlights as we talk about this game. VCU probably had their best home crowd of the season. I would say it's a big A-10 game. St. Louis, obviously a team that's always in the NCAA tournament, and so I was impressed to see the Siegel Center filled to the brim, especially after the last time they were at home was the game that no one was allowed. I was able to go since I was credentialed, and it was like COVID, and honestly, it was worse than COVID because during COVID, you at least had family that was in the stands. For this matchup against George Mason last week, nobody was there. I think, was it George Mason? I believe it was. But so to see the Siegel Center packed to the brim once more was awesome, and VCU played really well. They shot the three ball great. Joe Bamisile was all over the place. Give credit to Robbie Avila, able to get that one to go right before the halftime buzzer. Watching this guy going up and down the court, I will say you wouldn't have thought he was a D1 athlete. I'll be frank with you, but he was incredible. By far, the best player for St. Louis, in my mind, by far. He was able to create, and they were able to keep this game close in the second half. But that's when St. Christopher's own Brandon Jennings had two back-to-back threes, that one off of a steal, and then this brought the house down. Joe Bamisile with a two-hand jam, and he was pumped up about it as well. The crowd went nuts, and that was kind of the story in this one as VCU took care of business at home with the big win, 78-62. The Rams in this matchup had 22 offensive boards. Just incredible from VCU that they were able to get the offensive glass that much, especially because they don't have that many true big men. They have a lot of stretch guys. But 22 offensive boards, that led to 35 more shots. Any team that's going to take 35 more shots than their opponent is going to win the matchup, and that's exactly what we saw. VCU now takes down St. Louis, handing them their first conference loss of the year. They were 3-0 to start the year in conference play. VCU hands them their first conference loss and now sits atop of the A-10 standings with a couple of other teams that are also 3-1 in conference play. In fact, let's take a look at those A-10 standings before we continue this chat real quick. We'll go here, and then we'll go here. And that's the American East. We go to the American 10. There you have it. George Mason sits at 4-1. They're at the top. But VCU, of course, has taken down the Patriots. They're at 3-1. St. Louis is 3-1, and Duquesne, but all sitting at 3-1. But at 13-4, VCU is sitting in a good spot to kind of have this resume of if they don't win the the A-10 tournament, maybe they'll be a bubble team. And I think coming into the season, I think the league was expecting to maybe 3 NCAA tournament qualifiers. The league's kind of eating itself alive right now, though. St. Bonaventure has 2 losses. They're sitting at 15-3. And then, of course, the other team that's kind of in the picture, probably George Washington at 13-4. But to say the least, a big win for VCU, 78-62. Next up, they'll travel to St. Joseph's. Tomorrow night is when they take on St. Joseph's. But this is what head coach Ryan Odom had to say following the Rams' big win over St. Louis. Let's check it out.
A really good win for us. It's a good team, a well-coached team, over there at St. Louis, and we have a ton of respect for Coach Schertz and, what they're doing, right now with their team. They're tough and play the game the right way. So, good win.
Yeah, a good win indeed for VCU. As mentioned, they moved to 13-4 on the season and kind of feel like they have that, swagger back, right? That kind of looked like the team that I think a lot of Rams fans and just fans in A-10 in general were expecting of VCU earlier, before the season started. I think I got a couple of teams mixed up here. I mentioned that VCU had beaten George Mason in that empty arena. That was actually Fordham. So they have not played George Mason yet. They will play the Patriots on February 22nd at home inside the Siegel Center. My apologies on that. They beat Fordham last Wednesday, and that was their first win since that game. All right, let's turn our attention now to our guest of the show. I was able to meet up with the voice of the Spiders, Bob Black. If you don't know Bob, because maybe you're new to the area or something, he's been working in sports broadcasting around the Richmond area for over 40 years. He was a voice of the Richmond Braves. He's worked here. He's worked at CBS. He's worked all over the place and has been a staple. And it was great to sit down and chat with the voice of the Spiders, Bob Black. And we'll throw it to that interview that happened earlier this week. Thank you, Bob, for sitting down with me and taking the time. The voice of the Spiders, Bob Black. Bob, thanks so much for taking the time for joining us. We're having Bob on because obviously he's a staple here in the Richmond community, and this past week was awarded the Bill Schwenke Award, which goes to the top broadcaster in FCS football. I just wanted to start there and kind of congratulate you on that. I know that you've won many awards over your career at Richmond, and I'm sure that none of them go lightly for you. So thanks for coming on. How you been? I know you're on the road right now.
Yeah, we're up in snowy Olean, New York at St. Bonaventure. We're getting the full effect of winter in Western New York. It has been snowing since we landed, and it's still snowing as you and I speak, and I appreciate your kind words. Very humbled by that award, football specific. Obviously, as you know, Nolan, it's a team effort, and guys like my analyst, Chris Anderson, and our sideline guy, Matt Smith, and our other play-by-play guy, Robert Fish, and our behind-the-scenes guys, Matt Josephs back at our radio station, a lot of other folks, all get that award with me. So very humbled by it.
Yeah, for those that don't know, Bob, you've worked at University of Richmond for over 40 years. The school gave you an award for that last year. And you have the radio show on ESPN as well. Yeah, how do you find time for everything? How do you do a coach's show as well? I mean, you're a busy guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's not bad. I enjoy it so much that it's not really work for the most part. I'm not saying we don't work hard, but I really do enjoy it. I love the people that I work with, particularly the people at Richmond have been so great to me. I've been very fortunate to do a lot of things in the Richmond market, from doing what you're doing, from TV sportscast to talk shows to program director of a sports station, all of those things. And the one constant, baseball, came here to do the Richmond Braves way back in the day. Never the Richmond Flying Squirrels, but the old Richmond Braves. The one constant through everything I've done here has been the Richmond Spiders. So I'm very grateful to them for a long, long time to allow me to stick around.
So I actually don't know your growing up, or where are you originally from, and how did you find yourself, here in Central Virginia?
I'm a Philly guy through and through. Go Birds. That may not sit well with the Washington Commander fans. And who knows, there could be a third meeting
Possibly.
between my Eagles and the Commanders here in another week if things go the way we'd like them to go next week. So I grew up in Philadelphia, full-fledged Philly fanatic fan for all their sports teams, as well as some of their college teams in the Big Five in the Philly area. And then I went to Syracuse. which we, I guess, somewhat pompously think is the best communication school in the
Yeah,
country. Although we
hard to
certainly
not
have
run into Syracuse people
right,
working in this
right,
business. That's for
exactly.
sure.
Whether that's local or regional or national, we do pride ourselves on being everywhere. And then I was fortunate enough to get the Richmond Braves job. There's a couple of stories that go along with that. We probably don't have the time for it, but was fortunate enough to get the Richmond Braves job. Did that for over 10 years, and that kind of morphed into the other things that I've done here, particularly the University of Richmond Spiders.
And how have you liked it here in Richmond? When did it kind of become home for you instead of just one of your sportscasting gigs?
Yeah, I mean, pretty quickly settled in, and as you well know, this is a great area to live. The Richmond region itself, Central Virginia, is absolutely booming with things to do and places to go, and we're very conveniently located. A couple of hours from Virginia Beach, and a couple of hours from the mountains and the lakes if you want to go there. And up to DC. So really love the area. Love the changing seasons, and love that we don't get deluged with snow and cold weather like they are
Yeah,
here
we get
in
just
Western
enough,
New York.
like one or two a year.
Yeah. So that kind of reminds me why I love living in Virginia as opposed to being back up here. Now, when I was a student at Syracuse, we never paid it much attention. We just kind of went about our business and walked everywhere and played in the snow and didn't have to shovel it, didn't have to clean off a car. I didn't
Yeah.
mind it then. But in the real world, very happy to be in Virginia. Both my kids born in Virginia, so a true Richmonder at this point for sure, with the exception of my roots to Philadelphia.
Yeah, no kidding. And obviously over your long career here, you've gotten to cover some great things. Obviously, the national championship with the football team in '08, a couple of Sweet 16 appearances, a super regional appearance with the Spiders as well. After all these years and all these different teams that you've had a pleasure of kind of getting to know and stuff, could you kind of give us maybe a story or two of one of those runs or a favorite team that you covered over the years?
Well, there are probably too many to mention, and I don't want to leave any out for sure. But
Oh,
I would say, your first at pretty much anything is something that's really going to be memorable. And my first year at Richmond, 1984, yes, that dates me, turned out to be Richmond's first ever NCAA tournament appearance. So, I thought the reason they went was because of the broadcaster.
Of course, yes.
Our Hall of Fame coach, Dick Tarrant, kind of takes exception to that and thinks it was some of the players. One of those players, of course, was my longtime friend and colleague, Greg Beckwith, who we, tragically and unfortunately lost. He passed away unexpectedly this past May. I'm sure that story is pretty well documented. But that team has a special place in my heart because it was Richmond's first ever NCAA. It was my first year and first NCAA, obviously, as a Spider broadcaster. And then to kind of bookend that one a little bit, in addition to the national championship in football, which was really special, and a super regional in baseball, which was really fun, going out to Nebraska for that and coming this close to being in Omaha
Yeah.
for the College World Series and a couple of Sweet 16s. I would say Richmond's 2022 Atlantic 10 championship
Really?
is also very special to me. I had Greg alongside still at that point. We just come out of COVID, which had been a challenge for all of us. It was a challenge to broadcast games in the COVID era. So to be able to be there, the way that team won the Atlantic 10 championship with 4 wins in 4 days, and then to go to the NCAA tournament and beat Iowa and get to the second round, that one was pretty special too.
Yeah, I kind of want to pencil back because, I grew up in Suffolk just down the road, and I remember, Richmond's run to the national championship in 2008 with Mike London, and it kind of blew me away. I wasn't really aware of the University of Richmond, obviously growing up, going to tech games and stuff. Now that I'm here in Richmond, I understand its impact a little bit more, but just out of my own curiosity, what was that run like to kind of, did it come out of nowhere? Were you guys expecting it? Was it one of those situations where they just kind of kept winning games?
A little bit of all of that. Now, we had been really good the year before and had gotten close. So I don't think it came out of nowhere. But I do think, at a school like Richmond, winning a national championship is a remarkable accomplishment. Small, private, academic institution to win in football. And I remember being in Chattanooga, which is where the national championship game was back in those days, and the number of Spider people who were there and just kept shaking their heads and saying, I never thought I'd see this day. I never
Yeah.
thought I'd see this day. I mean, that's like, it's given me chills again to remember those people who were alums, not just former football players, but just former students and alumni at Richmond, and faculty and staff. Was really a heartwarming experience. The best story out of that whole thing is that Richmond had lost midseason to James Madison on a punt return on the very last play of the game.
Man.
I'll never forget the kid's name. Scotty McGee returned the punt for a touchdown, and Richmond lost, and we were absolutely devastated. We thought the season was over at that point. But those guys showed the mettle and resolve and the grittiness and the intestinal fortitude, and they never lost again after that James Madison game. It's kind of, Nolan, why I could still tell the story of the James Madison game, because as painful as it was,
Yeah.
that season ended up great, winning a national championship. So I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from that. But it was devastating on our home field to lose to our arch rival on a punt return that had us all down in the dumps. And then that team led by Mike London never lost again and won the national championship.
Yeah, great story. Yeah, that obviously being in 2008, you'd already been at Richmond for a couple of decades at that point. And for my own curiosity, obviously, being a younger sportscaster and whatnot, I have kind of came into this thing during the digital age of doing, a podcast like this, for example. How different is your job today than it was, back in the 1980s, 1990s? And how have you had to kind of learn and shuffle as digital media has exploded like it has?
Yeah, I feel very fortunate. And I guess maybe everybody goes through changing eras and generations and work habits. But I feel very fortunate that I go back to really the old days of reel-to-reel tape and editing with razor blades.
That stuff
and,
seems like
right, cart machines.
Stone Age.
You don't even recognize
Yeah.
any of these terms.
They didn't even teach me that in
and
school.
then evolved beyond that into the digital era, which I love, by the way.
Yeah.
It is much easier, much better, much more simplified to do, much more efficient to do. So, you have to roll with the punches and roll with the times, or you're not going to be doing this any longer. And I think all of us in all of our broadcast industries and media industries has kind of figured that out. I think radio may have been the first platform to kind of go digital and to learn. And I dug my feet in at the beginning, and it probably cost me a little bit. I didn't want to go with the new wave when it began, but it became pretty apparent pretty quickly that either you were going to jump on board or you were going to be kicked off the ride. And I think, your industry, our industry, television was probably second. And I also think we're seeing it in newspaper as well. Just think about how our newspaper reporter friends now attack their job. It's not just, a keyboard, a pad, and a pen. They're carrying phones around with them, and they're shooting video, and they're posting on social media. So we've all had to adapt in the media world. And I feel good about how much I've adapted. I wouldn't say that I've adapted to everything, probably not even as much as you have, but certainly enough that I'm able to continue in the business. And I'm very thankful that I'm able to take it at least that far.
Yeah, kind of, to piggyback off of that, 40 years in this industry, was it the city of Richmond? Was it the Spiders, or was it your love for sports broadcasting and being around the game that you think maybe you stuck around doing this for so long in one spot?
Well, certainly the love for sports broadcasting. I think that would probably be first, and then just finding Richmond to be a very comfortable place to be. So I think there's a couple of ways you can do this, and I think you're experiencing that, with your move to Richmond now, and hopefully whatever your goal is, you make that next move. The other way to do it is to stay in one place, but experience a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And that's what I did, which is what I referenced earlier, whether that was, doing television, which I did, even a little bit at the station you're at now, and also for one of your competitors as well.
You stick around long
and
enough.
Program director of a sports radio station. What's that?
So you stick around long enough, eventually you've worked everywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is what happened. But I did it all in one city. Was fortunate enough to do some regional television for what is now Monumental Sports Network. Back in the day, it was called Home Team Sports, and did some regional TV for them. And kind of what I learned from that experience, Nolan, is that as fun as that was, and getting that exposure was great. And somebody just asked me this question the other day about being a network broadcaster as opposed to being a broadcaster for a team. I love the feelings that you get being a broadcaster for a team.
Yeah.
First of all, getting to know them all, being around them for months and months on end, traveling with them, eating with them, all I like that. I even like the pain that you get in your gut after a tough loss. When you're a network broadcaster, you're like an official, right? When the
Yep.
game ends, you're done. Whether one team wins, the other team loses, and you go on to the next one. So I think that had a lot to do with me staying in Richmond and staying attached to teams, whether it was the Richmond Braves or the Richmond Spiders.
Perfect. Well, I know you got a meal to catch. I'll let you go. But, Bob, thanks so much for tuning in to 8Sports Nightcap and telling us a little bit about your story. I look forward to seeing you on the sidelines here soon. Thanks so much.
Really enjoy the invite. Thank you, Nolan. We'll see you at the Robbins Center before too long.
It's another game to me.
All right, thanks so much to Richmond's Bob Black for taking the time to chat about his career in broadcasting. And last night, obviously, he was in New York for the Spiders matchup against St. Bonaventure last night. Talked with him on Tuesday, and then yesterday the Spiders were on the road at the Bonnies, taking on the Bonnies. And, I don't think the score really tells the full story of this game. It's a 14-point loss, but Richmond stuck around for just about this whole thing. And when I've talked about the Spiders this season, so many times I've brought up, the past couple of weeks about how they're without Delani Hunt now, and they're out without Delani Hunt. And it sounds like a broken record, but in reality is how much offense, facilitating, attention that Hunt drew in the Spiders' offense is now gone, and I think it's going to be hard for Richmond to find much offense going for the rest of the season. In their overtime loss last week to Rhode Island, they had Dusan Neskovich drop a career-high 28 points. He kind of made up for the fact that Delani Hunt wasn't there, right? Drew that pressure and was able to make shots, but that was not the case last night. He struggled, just 6 points, only had one field goal made, missed a lot of shots. Jason Roach led the way. He went 4 for 5 from 3. That's how he got his 12 points. And the Rams moved to 7-11 on the season. But they lost to a St. Bonaventure team that's 14-3 this year. I mean, that's a really good team. If they keep up what they're currently doing, they'll possibly be, one of those teams that could get an at-large bid if they don't win the conference. They, of course, have already taken down teams like Providence and VCU earlier this season. That's the lone loss in conference play for VCU as well. So St. Bonaventure, a very good team. Richmond went shot for shot with them for a long time. I really don't think that the final score shows you just how close this game was if you were watching. Next up for the Spiders is that they'll host St. Louis this Saturday. The Billikens have stuck around Richmond and will take on the Spiders at 2:30 inside the Robbins Center, and what should be a pretty good atmosphere. And for a Spiders team that has played, relatively well in the conference schedule, considering how poorly their non-conference went. I mean, they've already rattled off wins versus George Washington, UMass. Probably should have beaten Rhode Island, and they went shot for shot with George Mason as well, and they played pretty well last night. I think they've overachieved almost with if you look at how they played in non-conference play versus how they're playing right now. They're not playing bad basketball, especially with a limited roster they have without their lone returning starter, their leader in points, their leader in minutes, their leader in assists. They've lost all of that, and they're still managing to stay in these games. I think it says a lot about Chris Mooney and his coaching ability that they're even been competitive in these games. I know that sounds negative, but that's kind of the situation we're dealt with now. All right, how about we turn our attention now to the Commanders? Do I have a board for them? I do. The Commanders, they head up to Detroit. Jaden Daniels in their win over Tampa Bay went 24 for 35. 268, 2 touchdowns. The one takeaway I would like to talk about from that Tampa Bay game is that once again, the Commanders struggled to move the ball on the ground. Austin Eckler just managed 27 yards rushing. Jaden Daniels was actually the leading rusher for the game with 36 yards. And as we get deeper into the playoffs, having a good run game, I think, is going to matter more and more. In the last half of the season, the Commanders really struggled to move the ball on the ground. It'll be interesting to see how that fares versus a team like Detroit, who's going to throw the ball all over the place. Maybe Washington does match up well with Detroit if they can, stay in a shootout type of situation. If it's a grueling game, I don't think it's going to go good for the Commanders. But in a high-scoring game, I think all the cards are off the table here. I mean, this could go anybody's way. Detroit 15-2 this season. And one thing that I wanted to bring up about this matchup that I haven't really seen that many people talk about is how similar Detroit and Washington is, right? Dan Campbell came in. Everyone kind of thought it was a strange hire. He had that weird press conference, and it might have taken him a little longer to rebuild things. But last year was the first time that Detroit had won a playoff game since 1991. All of those years, they've made the playoffs a few times, but to win a playoff game through Matt Stafford, through all these different teams there, they had never won a playoff game since 1991. What's strange about 1991, of course, is when the Washington Commanders last won a Super Bowl and had a successful season. Obviously, the Commanders won a playoff game in 2005, but I think there is some comparisons you could make between the Washington franchise and Detroit, and now they're matching up. Detroit, it's like last year they had that great season that got them to the conference championship game before they lost. This year, it kind of feels like their year. They got the first round bye. And Washington, it kind of feels like the same thing happening. Like maybe the Commanders are succeeding earlier than anyone expected them to. Sitting at 13-5, their best season since 1991 wins-wise. And maybe they're a year away, or maybe it's this year. And I think there's comparisons with Dan Quinn as well. I don't think anyone was that excited that Washington got Dan Quinn to be their head coach. He kind of was an afterthought with the Falcons when he took them to the Super Bowl in the infamous 31-3 game. But here we are. Washington, Detroit. They got the Saturday night matchup at 8 o'clock. Today was their last practice. Coming up at 6 o'clock on 8 News, I'll have some sound from their final press conference before they hit the road for Detroit. But earlier this week, quarterback Jaden Daniels, kind of talked about this game, and he's kind of kept the same headspace this whole time, that he's not taking any game more important than the others. And that could just be coach speak, but the way that he's preached it all season long, I have to say, I kind of believe that this is how he feels about, entering this big game.
Obviously, everybody puts the implications and, makes it bigger than what it really is. But at the end of the day, it's still the game. You got to go out there and stick to your routine, stick to who you are, the process of what got you there. Go out there and just play football. And then to the guys, we're just taking it day by day. Be what our feet are, and, we'll handle business when the time to come.
So there you have it. Commanders match up with Detroit, 8 o'clock Saturday night. Should be a great matchup. First rounds, let's be honest, not great playoff football from either the college football side of things as well as the NFL side of things. The second round for the college football playoff was pretty good. Hopefully the second round of the NFL playoffs are just as good. But that's going to wrap things up for another edition of 8 Sports Nightcap here on 8 News Live, on WRAC Now, on our Facebook, and on YouTube. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll be back next week, hopefully at a regular scheduled programming. This week I know it was a little wonky. 6:45 next Tuesday we'll be back, and that, of course, will be a day after the national championship game between Notre Dame and Ohio State. We'll see if our local guys and Travion Henderson can continue to impress at Ohio State. He's been the key factor for the Buckeyes. We'll see if he makes an impact in the national championship game. But that's going to wrap things up here for 8 Sports Nightcap. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week, and I'll be sure to keep you posted with any other time changes we have for the show. I know it's kind of been strange between, obviously, the VCU playing on Tuesday, and then, of course, as well as the holidays during December. But the show's sticking around, and thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Bye.